All right, then, because we're on now. So, hello, everyone. This is Intelligent Disclosure. I'm Richard Dolan and my wife, Tracy.
Hi, everyone.
Glad to be here. And
welcome.
How are we going to jump in with this?
Well, why don't we start with how we came up with tonight's show?
Sure.
So that was last night.
We were
late
chatting.
last night. It was late last night because we stopped working and we watched Game of Thrones.
Oh.
Which was amazing.
Talk about our Game of Thrones thing.
No, I'm
sure,
not.
Why not?
No, I'm not. But it was amazing. Anyhow, so late at night, you did your best George Norrie. And because he has asked you, what's your favorite show? Are you going to do George Norrie for us?
Well, yeah. Okay. So we'll slow this down and back this up because I don't think anyone knows what we're talking about here. So last night, I was wondering, we were thinking what we would discuss for today's show. Today's program. And I remembered I had a conversation years ago with George Norrie on Coast to Coast. And this is what George does this. First of all, he likes to say, Richard, will there ever be disclosure? I guess every time. But this time he asked me, Richard, what's the best UFO case you've ever come across? Or something like that.
Well done.
Yeah, George is good because he's very, the emotions are there, the feeling is there, you know. But anyway, when he asked me that question, I hadn't had any time to think about it. And I instinctively came out with this one that we're going to do tonight. So it's a very famous case for UFO researchers. If you do not know about this case, and you're really in for a treat because you don't come across a case like this every so often. This is the Iranian 1976 UFO encounter over the city of Tehran. And it is really quite extraordinary. There have been attempts by some skeptics, I think most notably Philip Klass, and a few in later years to throw cold water on this case and say it's not really much all that exceptional. But I would strongly disagree.
Well, they had weak arguments, and
yeah,
we'll talk about that
later. We'll get into it. I agree. I think it's kind of a weird, well, anyway, yes, weak. But what's definitely true is that got the attention of like everyone living in Tehran, got the attention of the the Imperial Iranian Air Force, got the attention of the United States government, got the attention of the White House and a whole lot of other high-level people in the United States, including Henry Kissinger and CIA Director George Bush. You may have heard of those people, as well as President Gerald Ford. All of them were on the distribution list of this particular incident.
Right. No small case.
No, and much more was going on here. So it's a fascinating case, and intrinsically the case is quite amazing just because of what is described by everyone involved. The documents that we have and the witnesses talk about something that really defies anything that even our best technology could come up with. So it's really an amazing case.
And this case kind of has everything you would want in a case, you know, right? You've got the documents, you've got civilian witnesses, you've got military witnesses, you've got pilots, air traffic controllers.
Right.
So it's a perfect case to examine.
I love how you've gotten into all of these. So every week we do now an Intelligent Disclosure. Tracy throws herself into really getting into these. So I think that's fabulous. And you know, last week we did
UFOs,
another case in the mid-70s, and we're doing another one. And I know you've got a couple of questions about it, so hopefully we'll be able to get into some of that as we move. If
people haven't seen that one, that's a really good one as well, because there are a lot of similarities and the timeline is fairly close. So that makes it even more valuable.
Less than 1 year away. So what we could probably dive in, but we did want to mention, we did a Richard Dolan show recently. I interviewed
last night.
Came out last night. Two gentlemen with J3 Films, John Sumple and Jack Roth, who did the film Extraordinary, The Seeding. Right. That's right. And I just have to issue a disclaimer. I'm in that film. They shot me for that close to a year ago, and it's going to come out. But that's not why I think it's a really great documentary. I think it's actually really excellent. We saw it a few months ago. It's not yet available. It will be in a couple of months. But it's all about people who've had apparent abduction experiences. They're experiencers, replete with things like missing pregnancies and apparent hybridization or genetic modification of human alien DNA. The whole thing that if you study this phenomenon, you're familiar with it, but there's very good witnesses in this. Some of them are not new. Some of them are pretty well known to UFO researchers in the community. Others are totally new. And they're all very compelling, I have to say, don't you think?
They make some pretty good cases,
yeah,
I would say.
Like these are not people you would just dismiss with a wave of the hand. I think they've got something there. So it's very, very compelling. And I think that, they spend a lot of time on the missing fetus or missing embryo scenario, which I know is very controversial. A lot of doctors will just say, no, there's a total explanation for it. But you got to listen to these people.
Yeah, you got to listen to the stories and make up your own mind.
Right.
But definitely a worthwhile new documentary. But it's not coming out until September, but it's something to look forward to. And I think experiencers who are, in the shadows, have just been going through their own thing, this will be interesting for you.
Go check it out.
Many other people as well, but in particular you.
Right. We jumped ahead a little bit. The film won't be out until the very beginning of September, but there is a trailer that we included on our interview, so you can go take a look at that. And in general, I would say it's just it was a good interview. I enjoyed them.
The movie's very well done. Very well done.
So we can shift gears and talk about Iran. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, I guess we'll just set the stage. I have a lot of visuals here for everyone, and not that you need to know where Iran is, but what you find, like a lot of people do not really know their maps very well. They don't know their geopolitical, geophysical information. So that is Iran, people. It's right. There's that little, and you can see it's now a lot of nations are in a very central location geopolitically, I guess you could say, but Iran without a doubt is. You got the Persian Gulf here, you've got the Caspian Sea here, you got Russia here, here's the whole Middle East. It's very, very important indeed. And during the Cold War, all right, it was even more. Here's another kind of image of Iran. You can get a pretty good view of it. This is today, so it borders on Azerbaijan and Armenia, and you've got Turkmenistan here and down near Afghanistan and Pakistan over to the east. But back in the 1970s, when this event happened, it was more like this. Here's Iran, okay? See that? All of this was the Soviet Union, the USSR, before it broke up. Iran was an extremely important geopolitical ally of the United States through the 1950s and 60s and 70s. Of course, just a little backstory. Many of you know the US CIA and British intelligence also engineered the coup in Iran in 1953 against the Mossadegh government because, they didn't like that it was a socialist government that was nationalizing the Iranian oil industry. Can't have that. They engineered fake protests, brought in hired thugs, the whole thing. Got Mossadegh out, put in the Shah of Iran, who ran that country for the next 25 years until he ended up really dying of cancer at the end of the 70s. That's, I think, was the cue for the revolution, an Islamic revolution, which happened at the very end of 1978, beginning of 79. So, but here we are in 1976. There's Iran, and Tehran's up here by the north part. And this is a pretty amazing event. So I'll just start by giving you a little bit of background. So this is the night of September 18th, 1976. You have the Iranian Air Force involved in. This is really one of the most dramatic UFO events in modern history. It's, as I was saying, the case is extraordinary and the documentation is extraordinary. We'll get into all of it. And there are, by the way, I just want to point this out now. There's a few very good sources on YouTube relating to this event. We watched a couple of them today together, and I just really want to point out there's a superb short video about 60 minutes long by Think Anomalous. I think we both like this. And the website is also very good on this case. I think we both agreed.
Yep.
And that video is called the Tehran Ufo Incident 1976. Just go search for it. It's not hard to find. The research that he did was very good, and the graphics he put together are beautiful. And so if you want really beautiful graphics, go check out this video.
Not only that, it's very worthwhile. He's sort of trying to take the angle of, citing all of his sources. And so you can see below the video all the sources that he used for this, which I love, because you don't get a lot of that on YouTube, right? So
no.
Kudos to him for that. So
absolutely exceptional video. Definitely recommend that. I would also recommend a video, a lecture by my friend Ron Regehr, which is on YouTube. It's a really good lecture that Ron gives, a little more than an hour long. He did this at a MUFON symposium a few years back. It's an outstanding lecture, and that's an easy search on YouTube. And there's a nice clip from UFO Hunters, which I think you can watch on YouTube. They actually did a decent job with the case. Short, very short. So one thing about this event, it was reported right away in Tehran in local newspapers. And in fact, I'm trying to find out where I think this is from Ron's lecture. A couple of these I happily borrowed from Ron. Hopefully he doesn't mind. But Ron pulled this up. He had this on his lecture. And this is an Iranian headline. And I'm hoping it says surprising incident involving flying saucer over Tehran's sky. And this is September 20th, 1976. There were headlines in the local Iranian newspapers for the next 4 days after this, all of which talked about this event. And I think it was the 5th day, the headline basically debunked it and said it was a hoax or a big mistake.
Right, according to an unknown official source.
Yeah, of course, right?
Right.
It's always unknown sources.
Right.
Nothing changes. This is what we have in the news, what the quote news unquote today, unnamed sources,
right.
Sources in the something administration, whatever. Nothing ever changes. But in fact, from here, it made it to an English language Iranian publication called Kayan International. And then after that, it went to the APRO Bulletin. We talked about APRO in the past. They were an amazing organization. And APRO was first among the UFO groups to cover this. NICAP also did one shortly after that. I just want to show you the APRO. I kind of cobbled the article together here so you can see it on one page. This is a very good article, and considering that this article came out within a month or less of it appearing. It's in the September issue, but I think that came out in October. But in any case, this is actually a very good bit of reporting, just pointing out they got the story fundamentally right out of the gate. They said 2 F-4 Phantom jets of the Iranian Air Force pursued and were chased by a brightly lit UFO over Tehran, flying at 6,000 feet. In fact, as we now know, the altitude varied quite a bit. They talked about the flashing lights of different colors. The Iranian Air Force sent 2 Phantoms off in pursuit. Pilots eventually, they're treating this as if the pilots went out together, which wasn't the case. But
no,
again, they got it right out pretty well. Round body, the aircraft approached, the UFO increased speed many times the speed of sound. This is according to the newspapers, I guess. And then turned to chase the jets, which is true. Impossible to catch up with the object despite the speed. That's all accurate. Tried to open fire on the object when it became obvious that inexplicably, it says here, the electronically operated firing devices failed to respond. That is true. When the object came within a 5-kilometer radius, all electronic devices went out of action. They lost radio. Fundamentally, this is accurate. There's some details that are a little garbled, but they overall did a very good job of it. And NICAP, I just want to point out, this is a NICAP UFO investigator. This is their November issue. And I took this from my collection. I had to hunt this one down. And the hole punches are where I keep this in a book. But anyway, the NICAP got it actually even better in a way. They said as the F-4 flying at a speed greater than Mach 1 reached the same distance from the UFO increased its speed. The pilot's unable to close. A smaller, brilliant object came out of the UFO, came directly toward the pursuing F-4 high rate of speed. That's exactly right. The pilot started to fire an AIM-9 missile, but at the moment, his weapons control panel went off and he lost all communication.
Yes, because apparently when it came down, he thought it was a missile. So he went to fire upon it, you know.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Totally logical thing to do. And his instrumentation just went completely gone. It was just dead. So the fundamentals of the case came out very early and overall, I think, very well reported. Back then, we're talking 1976 going into 77. There was an American named Charles Huffer. He was living in West Germany at the time. Huffer was a very involved UFO researcher, by the way. There's other things that he researched and was involved in. I guess we'll skip that for now. But I'm guessing he learned about it either through NICAP or APRO. Couldn't find any pictures of him. I wanted to. Anyway, he took the initiative to request information from the Department of Defense on this case. They denied his request. This is in the summer of 77. He filed an appeal and succeeded at the very end of August 31st, 1977. He gets these documents released. I'm going to show them to you very quickly, and then we'll go into more detail. But let me just so you can see what we are talking about here. This is page 1. And again, we'll do more detail on this in a moment. This is a Defense Intelligence Agency document. Page 2, quite a lot of detail here. And again, we'll do the detail on this in a minute. And this is page 3. So for those of you who want to do screenshots on this later. So here's basically what happened. So at around 10:30 in the evening, we're talking, it's local time over Tehran. September 18th, the control tower at Mehrabad Airport is getting calls from a number of people about an unknown object hovering low.
Right, local residents.
Right. And they're all providing relatively comparable types of testimony, object with multiple colors, zipping around the skies, right?
Also, they reported the object separating and coming back together. Of course, that, you know, maybe that was an illusion of lights. Who knows? But that's what the reports were.
But more than one person reported this.
Yes.
So the control operator, who's the tower operator, is named Hussein Peruzzi. I'll show you a picture of him in a minute. He's getting these calls, and I think his initial response was, what do people know? But he finally, after he gets the 4th call, he gets his binoculars and he goes out and he's looking in the direction that people are seeing, and he does indeed see the document. Let me just show you a picture of Peruzzi. That's him right there. It's a nice. Some of these images come from, there were documentaries done in subsequent years, like History Channel. I think UFO Hunters did one. Sightings back in the 1990s did one. And this
there was also the Iranian Air Force reenactment film that I think some of these images came from as well.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad you remembered to do that. And actually, I'm going to back up just for a moment and show you this close-up of page 1 of the DIA document. And just take a look at this. This is the distribution list here, okay? So you've got Joint Chiefs of Staff is listed. I put this in red so you can just kind of read this a little bit more easily. Secretary of State, that's Henry Kissinger at the time. CIA, NSA, White House, Air Force Chief of Staff, Chief of Naval Operations, Army Chief of Staff, DIA, Secretary of Defense. So it's a very, it's a very elite distribution list indeed. All these
I need to tell
copies.
all of these people that it was not a UFO.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So here, here's Peruzzi, and there he is again. So he's looking out at this with binoculars, and he sees what looks like a rectangular object or maybe a cylindrical object. It's hard to know, but it's longish. And in his words, it's got the 2 ends were pulsating with a whitish blue color. Around the midsection was this small red light that kept going in a circle. I was amazed. This is an artist's rendition of that object. And again, I've got to give my thanks to Ron Regehr. This is where I pulled this image. Ron showed this and his lecture. Looks like a pretty good representation of it. Peruzzi actually saw quite a bit of detail, and he brings other associates and trainees with him to watch. They're all looking at this, and they concluded that this object was actually changing its shape, or it certainly looked like it was changing its shape. It goes from glowing and pulsating as a cylindrical to a kind of starfish. There are starfish images of this. I didn't bring this in for our purposes tonight. Maybe I should have. In any case, Peruzzi calls the Iranian Air Force Command around 12:30 at night, so a little after midnight. He reaches General Nader Yousefi. This is General Yousefi. This is again from, I think from sightings. This image is everywhere. He was the base operations commander at Cherokee Air Force Base, about 170 miles, I was trying to estimate, from Tehran, mostly west, a little bit to the southwest. Turns out Yousefi was at home in northern Tehran, and he was able to see the object himself. He thought it was kind of unusual.
And by the way, I just want to add there, it was hovering around 6,000 feet.
Okay.
So it was just hanging out in this area.
Yeah, and that's like not something that you would really see anything do. Like a commercial or even a military aircraft is not going to do that. Helicopter could obviously hang out there, but how is a helicopter going to confuse people? You hear it. You can usually identify it pretty well. That no one identified this. This is a bizarre object.
Well, I mean, we'll get into this later, but Klass said this was a planet.
Philip Klass, Jupiter.
Yeah. 6,000 feet. I'll just say that again.
All right, well.
To remember that for later.
Right. No, exactly.
Yeah.
So they scramble. I'm going to show a map of where they're scrambling this from. And let's just move this over again. There we go. So this is located. Here's Tehran right here. Here's Cherokee Air Force Base. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly.
I think it's Cherokee.
And I used Google Earth. It looked like it's about 160 miles from Tehran. Other people said it was more like 200 or 170, whatever. It's a reasonable distance, not too far for fighter jets, obviously, to get to where they need to go. So the first one is dispatched at 1:30 in the morning. All of this takes time. Meanwhile, the object is hanging out there. So it was seen at 10:30. It's now 3 hours later. And this is a very long-lasting event.
Right.
Yeah. So the first F-4 is piloted by Yadi Nazeri. I've got an image of him here. Oh, this is an F-4 from the Imperial Iranian Air Force. These were outstanding fighter aircraft of their day, without a doubt. This is Nazeri.
Weren't they supplied by the U.S. as well?
That's exactly it.
Okay.
The United States supplied the Iranian Air Force. And of course, they had to do this for Iran because Iran, as a key U.S. ally, right bordering with the Soviet Union. So they supplied the aircraft. They trained the pilots. Like, they made sure that Air Force was in excellent shape, which it was. You look at these fighter pilots. All these fighter pilots, for wherever you go, they all look the same. They're all like sharp-looking, tough-looking guys. And here's Nazeri. He certainly fits the bill. So as reported in the DIA memo, all right, that we have, now his event is interesting enough. According to his statements were even more interesting. So according to the document, he sees the object very easily, I think I've got it here, at a distance of about 70 miles. It was intensely brilliant and easily visible. So that what the DIA document states is that when he came to within about 25 nautical miles of the object, roughly 29 or 30 statute miles, his aircraft lost all instrumentation and communications, and then states that he broke off the intercept at that point and headed back, at which point his aircraft regained all instrumentation. And that's dramatic enough. Now, according to his own statement, there's a bit more detail. And there's a reason, I think, why the memo got this a little bit wrong, because as we learned later, The U.S. Representative who sat in on the interviews the next day, the impression that I got is that he only sat in on the second pilot's testimony, that is Jafari.
Yeah.
So I think he may have garbled some of this information when he reported back.
Possibly.
Is the impression I get. But I'm going the wrong way here. Let me just look at my notes here. I've just lost what Nazari said is that he initially closed in on the object, and when he reached the distance of 25 nautical miles, the object moved away from him at a speed even faster than his own speed. So this is a little bit different. So he tries to pursue it and couldn't reach it. According to what he apparently said, he couldn't even reach it at Mach 2.
Right. I actually went and looked up the speeds. I didn't write them down. I should have, because a lot of people know that, probably a lot of people watching this, but a lot of people don't.
This is twice the speed of sound.
Right.
It's incredibly fast. So, the speed of sound varies depending on your altitude, but the speed of sound at ground level is, I think, just under 700.
I think it's a little over 700
feet, miles per hour, or something like that, right? So this is roughly double that. So anyway, he's pursuing it, and it's outdistancing him. And then when he turns back, he said, an object, we don't know if it's the same object, flew by him. And he eventually starts to approach this unknown object. And when he did that, he lost all radio and navigational capability. So the DIA memo gets it not quite exactly right. There's, in fact, more detail. And then he regained that capability when he broke off. So by this point, another F-4 was already authorized and scrambled. This was piloted by Squadron Commander Lieutenant Parviz Jafari. And I got a nice picture of Jafari here. I love this picture of Parviz Jafari. So he takes off with his radar operator. He gets out there. He sees the object. And when he reaches a distance of about 27 nautical miles, about the same distance that the previous pilot had gotten, he gets a very substantial radar return, in his view, his words, comparable to a 707 tanker. That's actually the words of the memo here, if you can read that. So at this point, the object, whatever this is, begins to move away from him at the same speed. This is according to the memo we have. Now, what Jafari stated elsewhere, in fact, this is a great image. Oh, this is a rendition of what he saw. This is again from Ron Regehr's lecture. Thanks, Ron. This is Jafari years later this is for UFO hunters.
Right.
He's talking to Bill Burns, who's standing right over here, and the rest of the team. And I think you probably saw this, or you remembered this as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's nice because you get to see him tell the story.
Yeah, exactly.
A little bit of footage of him telling it. So I think that's always valuable.
Well, the thing that he says here is that the object jumped. It wasn't just moving away at his speed or even a little bit faster. He said it jumped unbelievable distances, including, by his estimate, 27 miles instantly.
Yeah, he said
a
second or less than a second, right?
Okay.
He didn't even think it took that long.
Yeah,
a second.
It's extraordinary. Now, he said the same thing for James Fox when James did I Know What I Saw about 10 years ago, in fact, back in 2009. So he said this a number of times. And you can watch this. This is on YouTube, History Channel's UFO Hunters. And he's quite animated as he gives this interview, and he's quite articulate.
Right. James Fox's movie is also on YouTube, and people can watch a little bit more of him talking about this.
Oh, the whole movie's on YouTube?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't realize
that.
That's a very good film. James really has done some very good work. The first thing I ever appeared in was by James Fox, Out of the Blue, way back in 2000, 2001. I had nice black hair, big round glasses, which I had to take my glasses off. I didn't want my glasses. They were reflective, and I was blind as a bat. But anyway, that's a whole other story. So back to Jafari. So this is him giving his statement to UFO hunters. And he just said, look, this object was so bright. It gave off these flashing strobe lights in a rectangular pattern. And again, I had that here. You can see that. In fact, what he said is that the sequence was so fast that everything seemed like it was simultaneously.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like a strobing effect.
Right.
Super bright. But because it was so bright, no one could ever get a grip on the structure. And that is one thing that was really interesting. But they did have these multicolor lights that he said were moving around so quickly. It was like it was strobing.
This is a painting that he did of the event. So he obviously was very, very taken by this. It's quite a good rendition of what he encountered by Jafari himself. So, but the story gets even more amazing than this. So the UFO releases another object from its somewhere from within it. And this is now the DIA memo, and I transcribed it here so you can just read it more easily. So estimated to be 1/2 to 1/3 the apparent size of the moon. So good size little object. It goes straight for Jafari's F4, quote, at a very fast rate of speed. He tries to fire an AIM-9 missile at it because obviously this is a threat.
Yeah, he thought it was a missile.
At that instant, his weapons control panel went off. This is the words of the memo, and he lost all communications. Seeking to evade, he's now trying to get away from this thing. He dives, turns away. According to the memo, the object follows him, turns inside his own turn. And by the way, Peruzzi, the air traffic controller at Meribet Airport, is watching this as well. And then the object returns to the main object for a perfect rejoin. That's the words of the memo. And at that time, Jafari regains communications and weapons control.
Can we just say in the interview, Jafari is saying, you know, I'm traveling at the speed of sound and this is circling around me.
Yeah.
He was so frightened by this. He was, you know, he had prepared himself to eject, you know, because he couldn't figure out what this was.
Yeah, I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. So, and at this point, there's another object that comes down from this object. It rapidly descends, right? And so he and his radar operator are watching this, and they're waiting for an explosion. There's no explosion. In fact, it looks to them that the object is just resting gently on the earth. And it casts this very bright light over a large area, a couple of miles. And the document is very matter of fact. It just says they noted its position and then headed back. But actually what Jafari said is that this thing was so bright, they actually were almost blinded by it.
Right. And it took their eyes a long time to readjust to the darkness again.
Right.
Yeah.
So they would fly back. So, and then as he told the story, and this is not on the memo as well, he approached the main object one more time. But I don't really understand how the sequence really goes. So he lost his nav instrumentation a second time. At some point, he's ordered by General Yousefi to shoot down this object. But his firing control panel became inoperational again. So it sounds like a number of times he lost control over key instrumentations. So he's ready to land at Meribet Airport. He circles a few times. He's getting a lot of interference, electromagnetic interference. He's losing communications. It seems to be very intermittent. There's also like one commercial or civilian airliner approaching Meribet at this time. It's late at night, but there was one non-military craft coming in, and they also experienced communications failure, but I don't think that pilot saw anything. And then on his final approach, Jafari and his operator see a cylindrical shaped object with bright, steady lights on each end and something flashing in the middle. This is very much what Peruzzi saw. So then they land. Now, Peruzzi actually saw this thing depart, according to his testimony. Did you get to that? Or because what he actually said is by around, as the air traffic controller, 4 a.m.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, he did see it depart.
Object leaves. It goes straight up.
Yeah.
It just at apparently a high rate of speed. So let's just do a little math.
That was it.
Let's say 10:30. I'm going to say 10. Calls started coming in at 10:30.
Mhm.
We just say 10 o'clock. So you're talking 6 hours or 5.5 to 6
Mhm.
hours of this object over Iran at the least, at the very
Right.
bare minimum. So really kind of an amazing thing.
Mhm.
So that's the basic of the story itself. But then there's some follow-up. So you have the crew is taken in helicopter the next morning to the area where they thought the object had landed, that thing that descended down. It was a dry lake bed, and they didn't see anything, but they picked up a beeper signal.
Mhm.
Did you read?
Yes. And
What was
this
this whole thing?
strange buzzing kind of emergency signal. And there
Right.
were other planes in the area at the time that this happened that reported hearing the same thing.
Right.
This
Right.
like emergency signal.
So they go to the area where the beeping, the signal's the loudest, and it's
Right.
a little house with a nice
Right.
little garden. And they land and they ask the people living there, "Do you notice anything unusual last night?" And actually, turns out the entire city did, and they said yes, it was a loud noise and a
Yep.
bright light like lightning, I think
Yep.
they said. So, but we don't really have any information as to what any of that meant.
Right. I think that's where it kind of goes dead. That the
Right.
report, there's no follow-up on any of this. So
Right.
I mean, publicly, we don't have any information. I'm sure a lot
Exactly.
happened.
No, well, what we do
Right.
know is that the pilots were interviewed that very day, the
Mhm.
day after the event. So, and there was an American who sat in, Lieutenant Colonel Olin Moy of the U.S. Air Force, and he was the one who prepared the memo, apparently. And so he sat in there, and he sat in for Jafari's testimony. I don't know if he sat in for the first pilot's testimony, and it's understandable how he would have gotten some details wrong. I mean, he's listening to
Mhm.
this. I think he took notes the best he could, but I think there was a lot of detail that the Iranian pilots later recounted that was actually more
Mhm.
incredible even than the
Mhm.
memo.
I think Jafari actually stated somewhere that he wanted to talk to him further, and he looked for him after the interview, and he just was gone.
Oh, well,
or he thought that he might have more questions for him,
right.
but he was just gone. So
There was one follow-up to this that is absolutely worth looking at, and let me just make sure I've got it. This is it right here. So this was written up on about a month later, on October 12th, by Colonel Roland Evans, and this is an evaluation of Moy's memo for the DIA. And Evans calls this report an outstanding report. And I just want to read some of the language that he uses to describe it. He just says, because it's kind of hard to read it, but you can go through. He says, this case is a classic which meets all the criteria necessary for a valid study of the UFO phenomenon. A, the object was seen by multiple witnesses from different locations and viewpoints. B, the credibility of many of the witnesses was high. C, visual sightings were confirmed by radar. D, similar electromagnetic effects, EME, were reported by 3 separate aircraft. E, there were physiological effects on some crew members, loss of night vision, yes, due to brightness of the object. And then F, an inordinate amount of maneuverability was displayed by the UFOs. In fact, there's even more than that. The fact that this thing could change shape and much more. And then there was one other follow-up a couple of years later by Captain Henry Shield, Now You See It, Now You Don't, where he really essentially restates most of what you see in the Moy memo of the DIA. And that's about all we have in terms of documents, even though the DIA memo indicated that there would be more information that would be forwarded. We haven't gotten anything else. However, I want to point out during the late 70s and early 80s, there were 2 UFO researchers, Barry Greenwood and Lawrence Fawcett, and they were, first of all, they were excellent researchers, but they were very much involved in looking into this case among many others, and they had their own information on this. I just want to share this screen now. They just wrote that reliable sources have told us the Iranian case was about 1.5 inches thick, yet absolutely no admission to having this file has come from any government agency with a possible connection to the case. I think that's very interesting indeed. And I'll just add, there was another interesting tidbit added a couple of years later by Iranian General Yousefi, who we just mentioned earlier, and another General Mahmoud Sabat. And they indicated that General Richard Secord, and that's this man right here. By the way, Secord was very much implicated in the Iran-Contra affair a number of years later. He made millions of dollars off the illegal sale of weapons to Iran. But that's another story. Secord at this time in the 70s was chief of the Air Force mission in Iran. And according to Generals Yousefi and Sabat, Secord was in the briefing, high-level briefing with Iranian authorities and pilots. And I think that's significant. Furthermore, Lieutenant General Abdullah Azarbarzin of the Iranian Imperial Air Force admitted to U.S. reporters. I think I've got a slide here for this. Here we go. I wish I had a picture of Azarbarzin. I couldn't get one that I thought was reliably of him. But what he stated is that all of this was very carefully documented and passed on to the U.S. Air Force. He said this was the request from the U.S. They have the procedure. If we have some information on UFOs, we're just exchanging all this information, and we did it. So that's an important statement. You've got, the U.S. is actively seeking UFO information from Iran, presumably on a regular basis and presumably from all their other allies as well. Mm-hmm. U.S. never admits this stuff. So Jafari started talking a little bit more about this in later years. Actually, he talked about it immediately within Iran, but also when the Americans caught up with him in the 90s, he talked for sightings and he talked for UFO hunters. And he eventually ended up, this is Jafari at the National Press Club in 2007. This was organized by Leslie Kane and James Fox. Very excellent press conference. A lot of other people. Nick Pope was there, and other individuals spoke here. But here's Jafari talking about his event at that time, as well as in many others. And then I want to talk about Ron Regehr. So this is Ron. I've known Ron for many years. He's an excellent UFO researcher. And Ron and a colleague of his named Lee Graham, who worked at Aerojet in California during the 90s. In fact, they appeared on the Sightings TV show in the 90s. And they confirmed something very important, that this UFO sighting over Tehran was tracked by the United States military's Defense Support Program satellite, DSP satellite. This is a graphic of the DSP satellite. Ron had a lot to say about this. He actually wrote a short little booklet called How to Build a $100 Million UFO Detector, and he was talking explicitly about this satellite here, the DSP. It's a great actual study that he did, but the DSP was a deep space platform. It was used to detect, actually not deep space, it was really in Earth's atmosphere, excuse me. It's a geosynchronous locations, and it was used to detect the launch of ballistic missiles. And it would be able to differentiate different aircraft by their infrared signature, and it had a comprehensive database of all known aircraft. And as a result of that, it also would track anything that wasn't in that comprehensive database of known aircraft, and those would be tracked as fast walkers. As a matter of fact, one thing Ron pointed out is that between 1973 and 1991, the DSP tracked, I think it was 273 fast walkers between 1973 and 1991.
That's amazing information.
Right. And the nickname for this database was called the Itty Bitty Database, and it was an acronym. But essentially, it was all DSP satellite UFO fast walkers that attract the space-based UFOs. I've talked about this in some of our other episodes. It's kind of important. But for the sightings episode, I actually I had a copy of Ron's book. It's in this house somewhere. Don't know where it is.
We have a lot of books.
And I've been looking for it, but I was happy to find a sort of a copy of this. This is what sightings had. I have this exact one somewhere in the house. So the database has all of these fast walkers recorded. And here's the date. This is the year 1976. And you scroll through, and I got a screenshot. This is it right here. And the Iranian case, we don't know what all of these acronyms mean, by the way. People have looked into it, and I don't know if even Ron knows what they all mean. But it does mean this event was somehow noteworthy. These are all fast walkers. The Iranian event was tracked. It's the exact location, the exact time was recorded in this database here. So there you go. Now, I think that's noteworthy. And the other thing I just want to mention, this gentleman here, this is from Ron's lecture, speaks. This is a man from Iran. And he was listening to the UFO lecture, and he talks, and he says, I was 12 years old in Tehran at the time. I was watching this along with my entire neighborhood.
Wow.
Everyone was watching this. And he said, this thing would go, he said, blip, 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 blip. And he's moving his hands all over all around, like as if it would just jump.
Right.
Which is exactly what Jafari said.
Mm-hmm.
He said, and it would make circles around the F4, which is also, I think, what at least Jafari said.
Yeah, Jafari did say that. Yeah.
So this man was a witness, and that's his statement. So,
wow.
Yeah, I mean, and his, I think as a result of this, and Regehr, Ron's position is that this was probably seen by 500,000 witnesses at least. I don't really know how many saw it, but I think it's fair to say a lot of people saw this. According to this witness, everyone watched it. And he said, in fact, a lot of the men got together and like went on these caravan convoys out to where they thought that something had landed. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people, this was not just the Iranian Air Force going out there. Civilians went out there. Mm-hmm. I don't know if anyone found anything. So then you have Philip Klass, and this is my last slide of this. So Philip Klass, of course, the debunker of all things UFO, wrote a book called UFOs, The Public Deceived. Got to say, I think his treatment of the case in this book is one long piece of deception. This was not honest, scientifically based skepticism, in my opinion. Klass did a lot of mischaracterizations of this case, frankly. So he falsely stated that only one of the jets had malfunctions. No, both of them had multiple malfunctions. He cherry-picked his witnesses. He talked to unnamed officials. Who are these people? No idea. Spoke to some engineers, he said, who said that the pilots were tired and poorly trained.
But again, they were unnamed as well.
Yeah, who are these people? No idea. Klass said that the planet Jupiter and the star Capella were prominent and confused the witnesses. He said the radar returns were just false returns based on atmospheric anomalies. He said there was a meteor in the area at the same time. So all of these things happened. And then he hypothesized that the thing that dropped out of the sky was probably by an undocumented flight that dropped some kind of beacon or an emergency beacon. How? Why? I have no idea why.
And they didn't come forward. They just happened to.
Yeah, I mean, this is all Klass, and it's hard to take it seriously. Now, Brian Dunning over at Skeptoid is someone that I actually think is very logical in a lot of cases, but he also takes this argument, and I just have to say, totally disagree here. I don't think that this is a very strong argument at all. Skepticism's good. You got to be skeptical on everything, but in Klass's case, it's not even just a blind knee-jerk type of skepticism. This strikes me as just Klass doing any kind of acrobatics possible to throw this case out the window.
So he's absolutely disregarding the testimony of the pilots.
No, right. And this is a totally very typical thing that you get with all of these prominent skeptics. They'll always say, you can't trust witness testimony. People make mistakes, even pilots. James Oberg does the same thing. Klass did this all the time. It was a stock in trade.
But it's not like Jafari was making an observation based on something that stayed in front of him.
No, right. This is a very detailed event.
Right. It circled him.
Peruzzi.
When he went away from it. It went overhead and went past him. A lot of things happened.
Right. So what Class is really hypothesizing is that all of these different highly unusual things in their own right, right? I mean, how typical is it going to be that people are going to get freaked out by Jupiter in the sky? Right. Jupiter's in the sky every night, many nights. It's prominent.
Right.
Yes.
Not to mention, like I was saying, 6,000 feet. And what were its colors? The colors were very specific.
Right.
Very, very specific.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So class dismissed, as James McDonald used to say.
Yeah.
Class dismissed. By the way, one thing that was pointed out in was that video we saw, we commented in the very beginning of this, the very excellent.
Tell me what
the video that we were talking about that we recommended.
Think Anomalous?
Think Anomalous, yeah. So he actually mentioned in his video that Dr. Bruce Maccabee did an investigation of this too, and I'm glad he mentioned that. Maccabee did one. Bruce is an optical physicist.
Sorry.
Hello. Okay.
Sorry.
So got to keep the sound off for this whole thing.
I was trying to brighten the screen and hit the wrong button. Sorry, everybody.
So Maccabee did his own investigation of this case and spoke to other engineers who worked at all the relevant Iranian airports, who worked on the F-4s in question, and said, in fact, including Iranian engineers at Mehrabad, who said that the planes were grounded for several days, and they were not allowed to examine the jets for, I think, 4 days after they landed, not until after the Iranian Air Force had examined them first. No damage. And he had other strong evidence to support that this is a real event, including he did an analysis of the radar returns, which were, way too long for this to have been an atmospheric phenomenon. They were nearly a minute long at a time. Very, very definite, solid returns.
Right.
And
this is part of his report. I was just pulling up where he talks about the radar returns.
This is Bruce's website.
This is Bruce's report that he submitted to NICAP.
So
on the case.
It's very long. You go to nicap.org and you could probably search it out.
Yeah.
So we're really getting close to wrapping up. I guess the question we want to ask is what was this object over Tehran? All right. So based on what we know, it doesn't make any sense. Like technological explanations, right? If you can dismiss Class's non-tenable explanation, which I think we can do, we're really left with something real and tangible. And the question is, what does this? American tech? Why? What? This makes no sense. Why would the Americans confront the Air Force of their key ally within the airspace of that ally? This is, you don't really do things like that. And there's never been any indication, by the way, that this was the Russians either. And you really want to look at the Russian possibilities, of course, because they're right there. But you think about what that would mean, all right, for the Soviets to go over the border and hang out over Tehran for 6 hours with technology that we don't really understand what this could be.
Makes no sense.
That's beyond provocative, incidentally. And the bottom line is we have not a shred of evidence that the Russians were behind this in any way. It's now 40 plus years later, and there's just nothing to show for it. As a matter of fact, the Iranian government did inquire with the Americans and with the Russians. And not surprisingly, both governments said, nope, we have nothing to do with that. But I mean, yes, you'd expect them to say that, but there's also no logic to them doing it. And with what technology? I mean, that's really the thing. The real problem is that this object so clearly outperformed American-made fighter jets. Someone was responsible for this technology. You're talking about something that could hover, it could move faster than an F-4 fighter jet. It could create electronic countermeasures that were not supposed to be possible at the time. It had electromagnetic effects that we don't really understand how this could have happened. It was able to detach its own incredibly nimble, a smaller version of itself that also totally outperformed the American-made F-4s, and also appeared to change its shape multiple times.
Right. The part that detached as well, it hovered here and then shot off at these incredible speeds,
Unreal.
faster than Mach 2. So
what does that? And then the whole thing just vertically ascends when it decides to leave after hanging out for roughly 6 hours or so in Iranian airspace. So that's what you got.
I think its behavior was really interesting. So we've got the main craft. It's kind of really big with all of these different colors, right? And then we have the little discs that came out of it, or the little
disc or discs. Maybe there was more than one.
Right.
You get a lot of UFO cases where multiple discs or objects do come out of a larger one.
Right. Well, something that was interesting was when the two pilots separately went to approach it, the very first behavior of it was it moved away. It tried to get away from them, seemingly. First pilot goes after it, is just checking it out, and it flies away. The second,
at a very high rate of speed.
Second pilot comes in to check it out, and when he comes in, it jumps. So again, it's moving out of the way. It's not staying there.
That's a good point.
So that was interesting. The same behavior happened with each pilot separately at different times. Then I think when they had the return encounters, they both lost communications and control of certain things on their panel. So it wasn't until their second time around that there was interference. Like they came back to the ship the second time, that there was interference with their weapons.
What it really seems like is the operators of this craft, they're operating on a very high order of intelligence. It's like you've got a martial arts expert who is expert in deflecting without even attacking.
Right.
These are expert deflections of very, very advanced, two very advanced aircraft. And it wasn't engaging in anything overtly aggressive, as you're pointing out, but it was exceptionally capable at blocking different types of approach to it.
Right. And
that's
even
amazing.
when Jafari turned away from it to go home, to go the other direction, to get out of there because he was scared, the smaller disc came at him, was following him, and just whoosh, right past him, way past him. And he was getting out of there, so presumably he was going super fast at that time.
It's like saying, and stay out.
Yeah. This was like nothing, just flew over him, shot over him. So
this is off the charts.
Again,
kind of
it could have done something to them.
Yeah.
If it had those capabilities that were so far beyond, and it didn't. So,
by the way, there was a little bit of a follow-up because the object took off at about 4 a.m. This might have been the same object that was seen over Morocco. And I didn't know if we wanted to get into that at all.
I think it's very important to bring it up.
There was a sighting. The timeline's all exactly right here. So shortly after this ended, over in Morocco, I don't have a map here for you, but you can kind of visualize this. Way over to the west of the African coastline is Morocco. And they saw, this is in daylight, an object that was described in various ways, but at one point, I think cylindrical, at one point spherical. And it was, I think, silver, luminous, circular. I don't know. This could have been a similar object, and it definitely got attention. The American embassy, which is in the city of Rabat, Morocco, sent a message to the U.S. State Department. This is Henry Kissinger, right? Okay. Lots of people saw this. Absolutely,
they said they
sound.
Have a flood of UFO reports in Morocco.
Right. So Kissinger gets these reports. Henry Kissinger is, Gerald Ford was president, but Henry Kissinger might have been the most powerful guy in the U.S. government in a lot of ways. Very tight with David Rockefeller. New World Order. That's Henry Kissinger. He gets this, and he takes a full month to make his reply. And he's referencing in his reply the Condon Committee report, which demonstrates UFOs are not alien spaceships. And this
nothing to see here.
Yeah, just keep it moving along. And, he said, we don't know of any aircraft or satellite that could be responsible, and, basically passes it off that way. So, and that's it. That's basically it.
By the way, there were reports as well in Portugal by a couple of flight crews that they saw these unusual lights as well. So,
thank you. Yeah. So this could very well have been the same object. But, you know, it's just like funny how Kissinger does this when he's clearly like receiving the detailed Iranian report from the same time, and his own staff. I mean, this is his own staff that's inquiring, and he's telling his ambassador and his embassy people, you know, don't get too worked up over this. It's probably nothing. And he obviously knew better.
Right.
But that's Kissinger. And, you know, not just Kissinger. Gerald Ford got this report. George Bush, director of the CIA, got this report. And many other, the head of the Navy, head of the Air Force, head of the Army, all got this report, and other very prominent individuals.
Even though the U.S. doesn't, at this time, claim to investigate UFOs.
So, right. So there you go. But
since Project Blue Book, so
you get statements again and again from military people from around the world, from U.S. allies. You know, not just Iran, Spain and Portugal each talked about how the U.S. grabbed all of their UFO reports, and France and, you know, Britain. We've gotten this from every major U.S. ally. The Americans are on top of the UFO reports, and every other of the U.S. allies defers to the Americans when it gets right down to this. So that's a really interesting thing to keep in mind. You know, if you're really wondering if UFOs are important, that's one thing. Like, every nation essentially collaborates and cooperates and is deferential to the United States relating to this subject. So that's Iran. Kind of an interesting story, for sure.
It's a really interesting story.
So
I was joking last week about making a coffee table book that, you know, those of us who sort of are convinced would have at our houses with the best cases. And last week's cases that we talked about, I would have put in there. And this is another one for our hypothetical coffee book for skeptics.
I try to write such a coffee table book, except they're called UFOs and National Security State Volumes 1 and 2.
Yeah.
There will be a Volume 3 one day.
Those are for serious skeptics that are going to go in there, but for family and friends and people who think that there's nothing to it, and because that's what they're being told, you know, these are just the perfect cases. And these cases really make me appreciate why you focus on some of the older stuff, because it is, you have all of the hallmarks of a perfect case.
Oh, this one, yeah.
Yeah.
And the ones we did last week as well.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Did you want to ask me something? I'm trying to think if you wanted to get into something with Wordsmith, Air Force Base.
Well, no, I was just thinking about those because they were all sort of same timeline, right? They were the year before.
Yeah.
And so I was just curious about the craft and something, you know, and similarities with the craft. I can't remember what I was going to ask you, but, you know, all of these cases from last week, I believe, and this week were reported on radar. They're very low flying. I mean, this one wasn't as low as at the Air Force bases that we talked about in the States. Those were around 150 feet. I mean, some of them 300 to 300 feet. They were super low.
The one at Loring was definitely very low. The one at Wordsmith was possibly about as low. Wordsmith's over in Michigan. Well, one of the things where, I don't know that this is the same object, probably isn't, but there were certain things in common, like the fact that it seemed to change its appearance.
Yes, that was one thing. And another thing was, you know, it was there were super bright lights, and at a bare minimum, like this one we talked about tonight had multiple colors, right?
Yes.
But it had a yellowy glow in the middle with a strong red light in the middle of that. And each one of these is, Loring had this red light in the middle as well, of all these bright lights. So I don't think.
And the Wordsmith one, when the tanker jet that was coming into Wordsmith was vectored in to go after this unknown object. This is in 1975. They followed it down Lake Huron, and visually they were saying, is it one craft or two? And there were times when they thought it was one, and there were times when they thought it was two, and it was these bizarre, confusing, flashing red lights that they were not able to figure out what this thing was. So it was confusing to them. So you've got this visual, like a visual deflection, visual
Yeah, it's like they were
defense measures.
Right. They were so bright.
Confusing.
As they were saying, you couldn't exactly define the structure of it.
Right.
But you would, but there were these commonalities of how it moved, or how, like you said, how it seemed to separate, and also that a lot of them had these bright red lights in the middle, which I found interesting.
The only way you're going to dismiss this case is you've got to throw out the testimony of these excellent pilots, the excellent professionals they worked with, everyone who interviewed them, who considered them highly reliable. That's one of the words used in one of the U.S. Documents. In other words, you have to throw out all witness credibility. And from your armchair position, thousands of miles away, which is really what class did, pretend that you know better than all those people did who are actually there. I mean, talk about, that's arrogance beyond anything else. But it's also, you're not in a good position to judge the information because you're not there. So you have to listen to what the people who were there had to say.
I don't know everything about what class went after, but it sounds to me, if class went after it, it's a pretty good UFO case. It was almost like, that's a good one because he went for it,
Yeah, so sometimes I would say I feel that way, actually. Skeptics often will.
We'll see.
They will
I don't
get
know
it
if
right.
That's true, but
skeptics will get it right, but they will. When you're ideologically committed, you better be careful because you're going to get things wrong a lot of the times too. Because just as J. Allen Hynek said years ago, this is a great statement to characterize them. He would say their attitude is, it can't be, therefore it isn't. And when you get to that state of mind, that's a dangerous place to be intellectually, because you're going to force yourself into a corner every time. And it's the same, by the way, with believers. It has to be a UFO, and I'm going to prove that it was. Bad idea.
Yeah.
So, look, we're not really here to prove or disprove UFOs, in my view. We're here to understand what
it was.
What was going on, yeah. So just like the safest thing is you are guided by what the evidence gives you. And that's it. And if the evidence is telling you that this is something extraordinary, don't be a fool and say, well, I know better than these people. Like, who does that? Really? But, Philip Glass does that. But I think the Iranian case is a great one. And I'm glad, actually, that George Norrie asked me that question. It really...
before I knew about this, I was surprised that you said a case I hadn't heard of recently. I thought it would have definitely been Loring.
Well, that's a great case, Loring Air Force Base. Absolutely.
But then this one, is...
This one has more detail.
It's got a little more dimension because people were outward with their testimony. I mean, Jafari's talking all over the place.
Yeah. Absolutely. And not just him, but
very
many
accessible.
Others. Yeah, it's interesting that the government of Iran would release this as they did. One skeptic just said, well, why, real important case of the U.S. government's declassifying it so quickly. But I don't think that's a very good argument, because you have to look at the time period. All right. The U.S. government before and after that period of time did not release almost anything. You got to be really, really persistent. But in the late 70s, it was an unusual period of time in American history when the Freedom of Information Act was a very new event that researchers had access to. And you have to keep in mind, by 1977, Jimmy Carter was in his first year as president. And Carter came in with a very FOIA-friendly approach. And he mandated, federal agencies mandated, he says, you are obligated to release, and to release quickly and cheaply, as long as it's not dangerous for national security. Now, there's always that proviso, but and you have to, what is dangerous for national security? It's a tough call, but in 77 and 78, particularly, a lot of stuff came out that, and I really think it's because of Carter's pressure, and that was like this little golden window that lasted for just a brief period of time. Even by the end of Carter's presidency, there was a definite conservative turn that took place last couple of years. And then when Reagan came in, they completely undercut the ease of freedom of information. But for a little while, it was possible. And so that's when this came out. So for people to say, oh, well, couldn't have been important, baloney. It was definitely important. But it was also a very special moment in American history where these types of cases it was possible to get them out.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the Iranian case is a great one, and we're lucky to have the documentation that we do have on it.
Mm-hmm.
It would actually be a strong case even without the DIA memo, but just on the basis of the testimony of the Iranians. But I think it's very strong because of the official government documentation we have.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So, all right. Well, I don't know how much more we have here. Should we get ready to wrap this up? Do we want to answer any questions?
Let's just see.
I don't know if we have anything here.
Let's just see.
Just keep the sound off.
Yeah, I won't hit the wrong
button. That was a funny little thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So while you're looking, I'll just say I'm definitely, you can make this a little brighter. Shall we do that? There you go. I'm glad we did this case. I'm thinking in the near future, I want to discuss the Belgian case of 1989, 1990. That's very well known. There's triangles. And I think there's probably quite a few others. We haven't gotten into the Dolan case in Norway, and I would definitely like to cover that with you. Mm-hmm. That's quite
that one. And
we talked about this.
The
Belgian case,
yeah.
Which I was just mentioning. So,
okay.
Do you see anything here?
This. Tarka Jedi asks, "Isn't there footage of the pilot speaking somewhere in America?" And yes, there is.
Right. So that's Jafari, who later became a general, by the way. So Jafari has spoken extensively about this, and he's talked about it back in the 90s for TV show Sightings. He talked about it for James Fox's film, I Know What I Saw. He talked about it at the National Press Club in 2007, and I'm sure that's readily available on YouTube, and many other places. UFO Hunters, maybe most recently, they got him on there, and I had a little screenshot of him talking for UFO Hunters. So yes, of course. Anything else here?
Why is there never any talk or debate about UFOs being advanced hidden government technology? Can someone explain why?
Well, I don't think that there's never any talk about it. Certainly UFO researchers talk about this all the time. And we're not just talking about it today. They were talking about it in the 1950s and 60s. There's always been this speculation that what people are seeing is some kind of advanced craft. I mean, when Kenneth Arnold saw, discs in 1947, his immediate assumption was that these were experimental U.S. rockets. Okay, except that they don't appear to have been rockets. They don't appear to have been anything experimental that we know of. So it's not that it's not possible. The CIA claimed 20 years ago, it was Gerald Haynes who wrote for the CIA in 1997, that, all those UFOs people were seeing in the 1950s, that was the U-2 spy plane that was triggering a lot of these sightings. And no, wrong. Haynes actually didn't point out a single instance of a U-2 flight triggering a UFO report, aside from the fact that U-2s flow at 80,000 feet absolutely straight. They're not going to hover and maneuver. But the argument has been made many, many times. Now, you may gather from that I may not be sympathetic to the argument that we're seeing experimental craft, and that wouldn't be true. I think that a lot of these sightings probably have been very advanced aircraft. But the thing is, media is never going to discuss it for the same reason that they're not going to talk about extraterrestrials, because this stuff would be very classified. And there's just no way that we have a very controlled media in this country. So get used to that. And they've not gone down that road, and they're not going to go down that road. But I suspect that, yes, we've been reverse engineering ET tech. I think the argument for that is very strong. If you don't agree with me, then check out some of my books or videos where I make this case. And based on that, we have done some reverse engineering and are probably working with highly advanced craft. Now, there are some people who argue that it's all experimental aircraft. Now, I don't agree with that, if only because there's way too much other baggage going on. Experiences by people with alien beings. There's too many of these to dismiss. Sorry, I just can't dismiss them. As well as the performance capabilities of these aircraft. Like there's no really good scientific timeline and analysis, or for that matter, discussion of the infrastructure that would have created these for them to be worldwide, going back not just generations, but actually centuries. When you start getting into these reports, you realize they go very far back, and they're quite good. Many of them are very, very good.
So some of the technology that we were seeing way back, we still don't see today.
We're not seeing even this Iranian case from 40 plus years ago. What can do that today? I don't know of anything. Maybe there's something, but we don't know about it. It's incredibly advanced.
Right.
You know, you're talking about maneuverability from hovering to incredibly fast, and not just moving fast, but jumping. Like from here and seemingly instantaneously somewhere else. And even if it took 1 second, as Jafari said, to go 25 plus miles, you can't, how do you do that in 1 second? That's not any kind of propulsion or maneuverability that we can explain. I don't know how you explain that scientifically, other than through what people like Hal Puthoff and Jack Sarfati are only now talking about in terms of the metamaterial of like the so-called Tic Tac UFO and the metamaterial like that Puthoff had talked about in his Vimeo lecture for SSE last year, where they're talking about the actual physical structure somehow, in Sarfati's speculation, slowing down the speed of light within it. How do you do that? That apparently is possible to change and to create a kind of space-time bubble to soften, as he puts it, the space-time envelope around the object that would allow this to happen. But the material science for that is off the charts. Like, as far as we know, you've got to be able to nano-engineer these materials at the nanometer or angstrom level. And the most advanced papers that I've been able to find talk about engineering at the tens of nanometer level. So that's pretty good, but that's not what we're looking at here. So I have a hard time, not saying we haven't been able to engineer at the angstrom level, but I don't know of any evidence that we've been able to. That material science is incredibly advanced. So anyway, it's a long answer to an interesting question.
I think it's a really great question, and it's a fair question. I'm glad that you took that one. We're probably gonna have to wrap it up.
So I think, we'll probably take it. What does the Navy's new policies on UFOs have anything to do with TTSA being created and them coming forward? I did a talk on this last week, so please go check it out. It's called the Navy and UAP, and I spent a good 20 minutes. I created a very mediocre looking video, so why not check it out? I'm not a good video editor, so I'm just going to say, but I did create this analysis, so please do look into it. And it's definitely true that that article that came out in Politico a couple of weeks ago now that talks about the Navy's new UAP guidelines. This is significant for several reasons. I'll just restate this, and then maybe we'll wrap this up. So as I said in this other video, which please take a look. And by the way, I wrote this in article form on our website, Richard Dolan Members, and that's available for members of the site. But the video explains it as well. And so Politico puts out the article, I think it's April 23rd or so, not long ago. They talk about the Navy issuing new guidelines to engage with UAP. Now, what the Navy actually stated is that those guidelines are in draft form and they're not done, and that we don't even know what they are. But what's also obvious, and I talked about this with Jimmy Church, by the way, on his show, it's very obvious that TTSA was involved in this article, and not only involved, they basically made the article happen and seems to me like they just handed it over to Politico, which what kind of journalism does Politico do anyway, frankly? So Politico gets this information from TTSA, Chris Mellon, Luis Elizondo are quoted in this article. So I would agree with you. I think that this is a TTA orchestrated bit of news. Now we have to ask, what's the goal here? Well, it's a form of disclosure that I think is underway, what I'm now currently calling controlled disclosure. This is not something I could have easily envisioned even a decade ago. I have to honestly say, I would not have imagined UFO disclosure being something that anyone could think that they could actually manage in a controlled, like in a normal way at all. Like, I think UFOs are impossible to control. But it does seem to me that the powers that be believe that they can have a controlled form of this disclosure. And so what they're doing is they're rebranding UFOs from UFO to UAP. Watch this very carefully. This is the new way they're talking about UFOs. And by rebranding it, Hillary Clinton did this on Jimmy Kimmel a couple of years ago, and it's out there. You hear it all the time. UFOs have a lot of cultural baggage, right? Alien abduction, military encounters, crash retrievals. It's all with UFOs, little green men, and so forth. Change it to UAP, and you've got all these government people saying, well, yeah, we don't know what they are. Right. It could be anything. And I think that this is what they're trying to do. So, but I also think that the disclosure, I think someone has made the decision that there's going to have to be a disclosure of UFOs at some point, because this is honestly becoming impossible to keep contained forever. Mm-hmm. All right, we've had 20 plus years of internet, and it has worn this secrecy down. Mm-hmm. You got to take a few steps back and look at the perspective on this. Like, the internet we take the internet for granted, and we forget how radically it has transformed our perceptions of many things, but certainly of UFOs. This secret's coming out. And so I believe that those people who are in full possession of the secret are scrambling. This is not an easy subject to control. Mm-hmm. And so they've got a rebranding emphasis going on here.
Right.
And this is why Jimmy Kimmel, of course, like, they're all just talking heads. Like, they'll do whatever they're told. And someone must have said, okay, we're going to rebrand UFOs.
UAP is the new marketing plan.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is just part of that effort. Now, you can criticize the folks at TTSA for doing that, or you can say, yeah, I kind of get it. And it's a little bit of both, in my view. Like, there are people who really will completely come down against TTSA. And you can definitely critique them. Jimmy Church said, look, they're dominating the whole narrative these days on UFOs. And it's true. I mean, if you search on YouTube for UFO, you're going to get one picture after another of Luis Elizondo just showing up on CNN, on Fox, and so on. And that's really ridiculous. So we need a broader discussion of this. But from their point of view, it's really not hard for me to understand why they want to rebrand this. Mm-hmm. Because the fact is, if you push forward UFO disclosure, mm-hmm. It's not going to happen. You're going to get too much resistance.
Right. You have to bring the whole stigma along with it.
So I think they're doing a kind of soft disclosure or controlled disclosure. And I think that's what they feel is the best solution. The problem that I have with this is it's going to fail. Like, there's no way, in my opinion, that they're going to be able to make this actually happen. At some point.
What part's going to fail?
This whole controlled disclosure. The whole thing, like, we're going to roll out, yes, there are UAP. We don't know what they are, and people are just going to be fine with it. I don't think so. Mm-hmm. Once you make this acknowledgement, people are going to realize, oh, you mean UFOs are real? Yeah. Like, they're going to put it together. And unless the media, and by that I include the internet, are 100% locked down, and maybe they will get to that point, all right? But unless it's 100% locked down, I don't see how they can contain this completely. I think it's
well, if we see all media go UAP all of a sudden, and that's all they say, right, then we'll know.
Right. So that'll have to include Facebook and YouTube and Google searches as well. And those increasingly are showing a tremendous amount of control and manipulation. And I've talked several for a while now about their dishonest search algorithms, which are totally dishonest and designed to favor major corporate conglomerates. Like, why bother watching YouTube at times when you can just turn on your TV and watch reruns of, Who's the Boss or whatever? That's like basically what YouTube is trying to turn itself into. It's total corporate domination. You hate when I do this because they're going to ding us again. I'm going to be taken into the YouTube's principal's office.
As we have been quite a bit recently.
Because, I criticize, God forbid, something that YouTube does. But anyway, back to the disclosure thing. I believe that, yes, TTSA clearly has very good media connections. They are very clearly driving a lot of what we're seeing now coming out in the media. And you can say that's a good thing, or you can say that's a bad thing. In my view, I'm actually glad, I have to say, when you look at the whole sum total of what TTSA has done, look, they were behind the New York Times piece in December 2017. Like, that would not have happened, all right, if it had not been for TTSA. There's no question that that's so. So they've been responsible for opening up a lot of the UFO subject for the broader public.
I think prior to that, people were always complaining that why isn't anything moving forward?
That's right. Yeah.
That was the dominant complaint. And so it is moving things forward.
So yeah,
people don't like exactly how it's going, but it is doing that. So
absolutely,
the dialogue is out there even more than ever.
This is a period of great change. And the fact is that change is never going to move fast enough for some people who want great change. Like, it's just, that's going to be the reality. And so when it's not moving fast enough, there's going to be people who are criticized for spin and for slowing it down. And that's inevitable. I think, and it's not always an unreasonable criticism. So don't get me wrong, but I think it's helpful to take a longer view of this as well. And I definitely think that, yes, it's controlled disclosure. Yes, it's not fully even honest the way that UFOs are being portrayed, but it's moving. Like, you can see it moving. You can see
it's probably not, sadly, going to happen any other way. So
we're in a very controlled society. It's very controlled. It's not like what your grade school propaganda told you. Okay, that's not your world. It probably never was your world, but we now understand the world isn't like that. We have a very tightly controlled society.
Mm-hmm.
There's openness in certain ways, yes, but there's a lot of control. And, other than a massive break, like a true revolutionary event, which maybe that will happen. But
we've had mass sightings with over 10,000 witnesses, and that's not enough. So
yeah, we have the Phoenix Lights.
That's
something else we'll talk about.
Right.
And by the way, there was a lot of concern, behind the scenes about that could cause mass panic. And so they had to throw cold water on that. That's what Fife Symington, the governor at the time, did. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll have to come back to the Phoenix Lights.
But back to TTSA, at least someone has the football and is running down the field, Yeah,
we'll see. And how far it will go is another question. But
it may not go that far, but at least, at least something is happening.
I think it's going to keep. I don't think necessarily that they're going to keep carrying the ball. It could go somewhere else.
That's right.
But I think we're moving. Mm-hmm. I think things are moving. We've got some momentum, seems to me. And I'll just say this: UFO researchers are constantly talking quietly amongst themselves, and there's always something percolating. So I think there's going to be more information at some point. At some point this year, next year, whenever, mm-hmm. we're going to see stuff breaking. There's always rumors.
You sound very
floating
optimistic.
Around. Well, a lot of information comes our way, and at some point, some of this will be, yes, confirmed and discussed. And I think we'll have some conversations, but we'll have to wait until we actually get a little farther down the road on that.
Agreed.
Tantalizing hints. All right.
I think it's time.
Shall we wrap it up?
Yeah, it's 9:30. We've kept everybody here for an hour and a half.
It's been fun.
Yes, we didn't get to see the chat tonight, and we didn't get to go through that many questions. I'm really sorry. I had a peek, and there are a lot of great questions and comments there, and we thank you for those. And maybe some other time we have a running list of them. So,
well, I think this will be a good time to wrap it up. I just want to thank everyone. We want to thank you all for supporting us. If you like what you see here, please like the video. Please subscribe to the channel. Get notifications. It helps us when you do that. And you can also go to Regehr Dolan members, where we've got a lot of information out there all the time. We just recently talked about an experience you had with, can I say, a being, a hooded being. That's on our site. We do this type of thing all the time. You and I do off the cuffs.
This is what we call
all
off the
the time.
cuffs. So we'll just get into a conversation about something, and then we'll decide to record it. So it's not, making an official statement or anything like that. We're just having a conversation, and we record it and put it up. So
the fact is, there are certain conversations we have, we don't want it to go out like to the whole world.
Right.
So we'll have it on a
Like
more
that
limited
one.
basis. And so that's at our site. That's at Regehr Dolan members. But in any case, we appreciate your support in any form just by watching this video. The thing is, we're all in this together. And by this, I mean an understanding and appreciation of the significance of what we like to call UFOs. This is something significant. If you're watching this, there's a good chance you may be watching this without telling your spouse or your best friends or your family, because they may think you're a little loopy or crazy or whatever. And you just have to understand you're not. This is a significant, serious subject, and there's a lot that goes into this. So if you feel like you're alone, you're not. Hang tight. The world is changing rapidly, for better and for worse. But this subject is not stable. It's not static. It's fluid. It's moving. And we're not going to be in the same place in 5 years that we are today. I firmly believe that now.
Oh, we're not going to be in the same place in 1 year, I hope.
Probably not.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it for now. And thanks everyone for showing up.
Hi to the chat family.
Smash.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night.
Good night.